And I'm going to say good afternoon, and thank you for spending part of your day with me. My name is Evan Weiner, and that guy to my left in the picture, to your right, with the baseball card behind him, is Yogi Berra. And between 2006 and 2011, I would give 2 or 3 talks a year at Yogi's museum, sometimes for the Montclair State students. And once we did it for SUNY New York Cortland. They came down to see me speak, take a tour of Yogi's place, and do a few things over in Manhattan. So Yogi and I got to know each other quite a bit during those 5 years, although I knew him before that, but really got to know each other over those 5 years. Anyway, back in the golden age of baseball, and the golden age of baseball depends where you are. If you were in the New York area, it was the golden age of baseball because a New York team, with the exception of 1959, was in the World Series every year. And that team that was playing the Chicago White Sox in the 1959 World Series was made up of Brooklyn Dodgers. So in a sense, every World Series featured the New York team except the Brooklyn Dodgers were in Los Angeles in 1959. During the 1950s, there was a French philosopher by the name of Jacques Barzun. And he wrote a series of essays, some on just the culture of America, others on international culture or whatever. And he wrote in 1954 as part of his series of essays, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of baseball, or rather of America, had better learn baseball. And don't do it. Don't go see the New York Yankees. Go see the Jersey City team in the International League at that time, or go to a high school team, or go watch a pickup game on some baseball field, because you could learn about teamwork in America from baseball. Baseball and the culture. Well, that goes back a long, long time, very long time. In fact, Andrew Johnson, who was the president in 1865 after Lincoln was assassinated, invited people from the Brooklyn Atlantics and the Washington baseball team to the White House after the Civil War, with the hope that he could get the word out that the healing has to start now after the Civil War, and let's do it over baseball. And baseball becomes more and more popular, and by 1888, there's a guy by the name of Ernest Thayer who writes a poem called Casey at the Bat. That's in the San Francisco Examiner. That slide is from a Disney cartoon featuring Casey at the Bat, who struck out. Now, I was in elementary school back in 1964 and 1965, PS 151, and I was 8 going on 9. I was a year ahead, so I was a year younger than everybody else. Not that it made much of a difference at that point. And I had a teacher by the name of Miss Alexander, and she had the blue hair, the blue hair she had, and she had the white blouse, and she had the blue skirt, and she had the napkin stuck up here in case her nose ran. And we all thought she was about 142 years old, but she was only in her 60s. But hey, I'm only 8 years old at the time. But she gave us an assignment, and the assignment was to read Casey at the Bat. Just read Casey at the Bat. Oh, that's cool. All right, so I'll read Casey at the Bat. And then we were supposed to write a little paragraph about what we thought of Casey. And the guy struck out. He had a chance to win the game, and he struck out, and there was no joy in Mudville, for the mighty Casey had struck out. And basically I wrote, Casey's a lousy player. He struck out when he could have won the game. Miss Alexander said, no. Casey, man can fail. He could be put in the best position to succeed, and man could fail. And I said, I am 9 years old. I said, right, it's a rotten player. He struck out with the bases loaded. Casey at the Bat. That brought baseball into the home. Now, Casey at the Bat was, it looks like, a throwaway poem done by a guy by the name of Ernest Thayer. Thayer and I have one thing in common. He wrote op-ed pieces with the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and 1888. I wrote op-ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner in the year 2001. Casey was printed without author's credit. It was just Phin, P-H-I-N, Phin, which apparently was Thayer's nickname at Harvard. And he would claim credit for the poem in 1895 when he read the poem at a class reunion, Casey at the Bat. By the point he reads the poem at the class reunion in 1895, it becomes rather famous because of a guy by the name of DeWolf Hopper. Who was Casey? We don't know. Thayer never said who Casey was. He might have been a player in Stockton, California, so it's claimed back then. The Stockton team name now is the Mudville Nine, which was the part of the poem. And it might have been King Kong Kelly, who was a big star in New England when Thayer was going to Harvard. Might have been somebody by the name of Dave Casey, who played with Baltimore roughly at that time. Thayer never said who it was and really didn't talk much about the poem, but it was a classic. It was a classic because of this guy. This guy's name is DeWolf Hopper. You might know his daughter, Heather Hopper, who was a gossip columnist when I was watching as a kid, the old Merv Griffin show, probably in the mid-1960s. She somehow popped on all these shows and she told gossip and all that. Before that, she was an actress. He was an actor. He was on the vaudeville stage and he gets a hold of this poem, which is printed in what is then a rather small newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner. San Francisco's on the other side of the world, literally. You know, Rocky Mountains is in the way, and there's San Francisco. No planes. There was a train back then, and if you wanted to go by boat from anywhere on the East Coast, you had to go around South America and come back up. No Panama Canal, but Hopper gets this thing and he falls in love with it, absolutely falls in love with it. You know, this thing is printed in June and about 2 months later, Hopper's on the vaudeville stage and he's performing Casey at the Bat. It's estimated that Hopper performed the poem more than 10,000 times. He did it on stage, the vaudeville stage. He did it for a record in 1906 and he did it in film in 1922. So he had a very long career doing this, at least 34 years that we know of, probably a little more. But he wasn't the only guy who did that. That is the Springfield, New Jersey Library. And I do give talks when they're open. They're not open right now. I do give talks at the Springfield Library. And there's a room there, big room where I speak, but it's also kind of a museum as well for Springfield. And that thing there, the Regina Sublina, still works. You throw a cylinder in there, whatever was recorded on the cylinder goes round and round and round, and that thing that looks like it's 3:15 plays it. And if you had one of those in your home back in the 1890s, this guy, well, you could have listened to this guy do Casey at the Bat. His name was Russell Hunting, and he was an entertainer, and he was a sound recordist, and he recorded it in 1893, and then again in 1888. And both times he used brogue, Irish brogue. Why? Because it's Casey. Casey was at the Bat, so Hunting figured that Casey was Irish. In 1905, Kaiser recorded it for Edison, Thomas Edison, John Kaiser, over at Menlo Park. Hopper's version was recorded for Victor before it became RCA Victor, Nipper the dog, and that would come out in 1906. Now, if you had one of these gramophones in your house back in the late 1900s or 19 teens, you could have listened to those guys. This was a gramophone that I found in Sagway, Quebec. I speak on cruise ships, and we went up to Quebec, to Chicoutimi, and I'm walking around, and this guy's got his garage open. It's a little bigger than a garage. He's got all this stuff in there, including that. And I said, I got to add that for my baseball talk, because not only you got that to the right, you got Edison phonographs. You could listen to Casey at the Bat at home if you had one of those cylinder things, or one of the modern stuff, or modern recordings in the 19 teens. Hopper would also commit the verse to film. That would be in 1922. That was a short subject by Lee DeForest. Wallace Beery starred in a 1927 version of the film. You might remember Jerry Colonna. He had that big bushy mustache. He was Bob Hope's second banana. His catchphrase was, "Where's Yehuda?" for a little while anyway. Well, he recorded a rendition for Disney, and that would become the basis for that slide, or for what you saw before from the Disney cartoon. It was a slide in 1946. Jackie Gleason performed it on his TV show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench and Tug McGraw also voiced the poem in orchestral settings, as did George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin. They did it for the Tampa Police Benevolent Association, and I can't tell you if it was after George fired Billy for the first, second, third, or fourth time, but they did it. There's a sign. If you used to take the New York City subways, you know there are signs all over the place. Generally, it's Dr. Zinsmore and his zit operations, or removing your zits. But back in 1908, I'm not sure Dr. Zinsmore had all those ads up that he has now. But anyway, there was a songwriter by the name of Jack Norworth, and he's looking up and he sees a sign as he's riding the subway. It says, "Ball game today at the Polo Grounds." And he's looking and he's looking and he's looking, and it dawns on him, he's a lyricist, hey, you know what? Maybe, just maybe I could do a song about baseball. And let me go to see my friend Albert Von Tilzer and talk to him about it. And Von Tilzer would supply the music to Norworth's lyrics, and you get Harry Carey while he's the announcer for the Chicago Cubs, the late Harry Carey, back in the 1980s and 1990s, and they're on WGN in Chicago, so they're going national. And in between the top of the seventh and the bottom of the seventh inning, Harry would belt out the song that Norworth and Von Tilzer wrote in 1908. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Now, it's a tradition that has carried on since Harry passed away. And people, celebrities do it 81 times a year. And there's a trick to it. You could do it, but you better do it badly, because Harry did it badly. That was the charm of it. And Harry probably re-energized or brought interest back to the song back in the 1980s. I worked with Harry in 1994. What you don't see here is Harry with his 6 best friends, all named Budweiser. The song, well, you know that part of the song. It's been argued that this song could have been one of the first women's liberationist songs, because Take Me Out to the Ball Game is sung by a woman. It's a woman who yells, "Take me out to the ball game." Highly unusual in 1908 for women to be at baseball games. Baseball players were considered ruffians or thugs, not good guys, not necessarily guys that you want to hang around. And, well, not only that, in terms of that, but it wasn't ladylike. Ladies just didn't go to games by themselves. But Katie Casey has a boyfriend. I assume it's a boyfriend, maybe somebody else, but they're about ready to go on a date. He wants to go to a show, and he really doesn't want to go to a show. But they're going back and forth, and she says, "You know what you can do for me? Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. You know, when it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. The old ball game." Now, Norworth was going out with somebody who is a woman suffragette. This is about a decade before Alice Paul, who's down in your neck of the woods, or the Alice Paul Museum. She was a real suffragette. She would have died for the vote. And he might have modeled Casey after, or Kate Casey, after after that, his old girlfriend. So it's written from a woman's point of view. Katie also knows all the players. They had no names and numbers back then, and she's not afraid to mix it up with an umpire. If she sees a call going the wrong way against the team she's rooting for, she was not above screaming from the crowd, yelling at the umpire. And she knew how to get the players going. And of course, she would sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" for that. The song would become famous not in a baseball game, but on the vaudeville stage. Norworth and Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game. Norworth would see his first baseball game in 1928, 20 years after the song came out. Von Tilzer would wait until 1940, 32 years after the song came out. Song would become famous on the vaudeville stage because of Norworth's wife at the time, Nora Bayes. She popularized it, along with another song that you probably remember, Shine On, Harvest Moon. Of the two songs that she performed in 1908, I don't think that Shine On, Harvest Moon is being performed all that much. But Take Me Out to the Ball Game from February through last week of October, first week of November, played somewhere. The funny thing about Take Me Out to the Ball Game is this: Major League Baseball never embraced it. And not only didn't they embrace it, there's a little area in Cooperstown where non-baseball people or entertainers are recognized. But neither Norworth nor Von Tilzer are recognized by baseball for their song. They're in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. The song would finally be played at a baseball game in 1934 during the World Series between St. Louis and Detroit. In Detroit, it was finally played. The song took on a life of its own away from baseball, including the movie Night at the Opera. Here you see Groucho Marx. And very quickly, I'll go over the synopsis of Night at the Opera. Groucho Marx is working for Margaret Dumont, who is the #1 patron of this opera company in New York City. And they hear about this great tenor who is in Italy, and they decide to go to Italy to recruit this guy and bring him back to America so he could sing at the opera in New York. Well, you know, it wouldn't be a Marx Brothers movie without Harpo and Chico. And Groucho befriends Harpo and Chico, who happen to have as a friend what they think is the world's greatest tenor, who happens to be dating the soprano who is going to be in this opera, who played by Kitty Carlisle. Well, to make a long story short, there's a stowaway scene, which is pretty famous, that they all fall out of the cabin, and then they get to New York. And they got to come up with a plot to somehow get rid of the tenor that Margaret Dumont wants and replace him with Harpo and Chico's friend. Well, they do. They knock the guy out, but they have to stall for some time so the tenor that's Harpo and Chico's friend can get into costume. And how they do it, Harpo and Chico have the sheet music for Take Me Out to the Ball Game. They go down to the pit, give all the musicians the sheet music. Groucho drops down and he's selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks. And that's how important baseball is in the American culture, that it's in Night at the Opera. In fact, the Marx Brothers had a lot of movies where they did sneak in a baseball routine during the 1930s. Harpo Marx would return to the song on I Love Lucy in 1955. It was featured in numerous movies and television shows. Abbott and Costello, Lou Costello of Paterson, New Jersey, and Bud Abbott, one of the most famous vaudeville / burlesque comedy acts of all time. And they're there in the skit. Bud Abbott is dressed up as the coach or manager of the St. Louis Wolves, and Costello is a fan of the team. And basically, this is a style, common style that comics told me was called rounders. And it's pretty basic. Costello plays the idiot or the pinhead, and Bud Abbott plays the wise guy. It's a common style of vaudeville in the 1920s and 30s, where you would say something and the smart aleck would reply and the idiot would say, well, I'll give you an example. Costello walks up to Bud Abbott and says, you're the manager of the St. Louis Wolves. I love the Wolves. Tell me about your lineup. Who's on first? Who? Yeah, who's on first? And it goes on and on and on and on. They could do it for a minute. They could do it for 10 minutes, Abbott and Costello, depending on where they were in the act. So that is called rounders. And baseball was not invented by Abner Doubleday in 1839, even though everybody around baseball in the late 1890s and early 1900s was hoping to find how baseball started. Well, baseball evolved from an English game called rounders. I speak in the Berkshires during the summer normally. Last year I spoke on Zoom to a couple places up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. This year it's probably going to be the same thing, although I'll go up to the Berkshires for a few days, a couple times. And there is, if you go up to the Massachusetts-Vermont border, there's an old museum. Well, actually, it's an old factory that's a new art museum that's been repurposed. And across the street from there, there's a little baseball museum, Berkshire's Baseball Museum. It's a storefront, basically. And in the storefront, there is a little article about how baseball, B-A-S-E, capital B-A-L-L, was played in the Berkshires in 1792. And apparently baseball was brought over. It wasn't called baseball, it was called rounders. It was brought over when English residents moved to the colonies. And it was played allegedly in 1792 up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. So it evolved from rounders. As far as the game that, or the commission, the Mills Commission was concerned, Abner Doubleday founded baseball in 1839, and they found this guy, Abner Graves, out in Denver around 1905, who said, yeah, I saw Abner Doubleday. He laid out the field. He was playing in Cooperstown. He was there. Graves was a drunk, and he was also brought up on charges of murdering his wife eventually. But he was the guy who said, yeah, Abner Doubleday. I was 5 years old. I saw him lay out the field in Cooperstown. Doubleday never referenced any of that in his diaries. He went to the U.S. Military Academy, and there's no proof whatsoever that Abner Doubleday invented baseball. But these guys get a routine, and it's called rounders. And it might have been written by Michael Musto. It was a type of vaudeville act that was common style, going round and round and round and round. Musto in St. Louis may have written it. There are others who claim that they wrote it as well. The question, did Abbott and Costello pay Michael Musto $15 for the routine? I have a friend, comedian friend by the name of Max Stocelli, who told me that he sold to Rodney Dangerfield 5 jokes for about $100. So $15 would be, in the 1930s, be in that price range. I have a friend, John Joseph, who teamed up with a guy from Atlantic City, and they were comics on cruise ships, and did a version of Who's on First, but a musical version. And John said to me, and by the way, John's mentor was Alan King, the comedian who you might remember, who used to be on the Ed Sullivan Show all the time. But anyway, John said, of course they paid Musto $15 for the routine. And Max Stocelli said to me, come on, we're comics. We steal everything. So we don't know if Musto ever got $15. You got to remember, comics. Jerry Lewis was up in the Catskills in the Borscht Belt and used to watch comics all the time and probably borrowed a lot from the comics he saw up there. And he became good. And he borrowed the routines. And he probably was a lot better at the routines than the guys he borrowed from. That's just how it goes in comedy. They steal all the time. So Abbott and Costello get together. They meet on the burlesque circuit. And by 1936, they get a hold of this routine, and they are honing it and honing it and honing it. And then they become part of the Kate Smith Show on CBS Radio, players on the Kate Smith Show, and they unleashed this routine on the world in March of 1938. It's a smash, an absolute smash. They may have gotten help from Costello's gag writer, John Grant, and a guy by the name of Will Glickman, who was still active in the 1960s with Car 54, Where Are You scripts in 61 and 62. As far as Abbott and Costello, well, they performed at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, performed it in the movies, on radio, on TV, and as a result, Abbott and Costello were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in 1956. Well, they don't have a plaque, they just have a constant loop of the Who's on First routine, and it's still popular up there. You know, Abbott and Costello last performed 65 years ago, 66 years ago, but over the years, Who's on First, What's on Second basically is a baseball fan's thing. Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer who started in Brooklyn at the age of 21 in 1950, is looking at his screen about 15 years ago. He does radio and TV the first 2 innings of the game, and he takes a look at the screen and he says this: "Now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first. There he is, who? The Dodgers had a player by the name of who? He's from South Korea, and there he is, standing on first base. There is a what? There is a what? He played for Washington in the 1920s before this routine became famous, and I know one thing. There's never been a third baseman ever from Little League on to Major Leagues that has been called I don't give a darn. Who's on first?" Speaking of Franklin Roosevelt, well, there is me and my wife, and we were guests of Franklin and Eleanor up at Hyde Park at the Franklin Roosevelt Presidential Library. But I wasn't in for any chit chat with Franklin that day. And besides, he's a little stiff. He and Eleanor are a little stiff. But they were gracious guests. They had books and all that ready for us. But I was up there on the mission. I needed to get some answers. I do a talk on the Hitler Olympics, the Berlin Olympics. I worked with Marty Glickman in the 1980s. And I interviewed Gretel Bergman, who never competed for Germany in the 1936 Olympics because she was a German Jew, and Sam Stoller, who I knew from the Milrose game. So, but I wanted to talk to Franklin about it if possible. I also do a talk in the early days of TV, and he was the first guy on TV in the United States, commercial TV, and why did he allow baseball to go on following the bombing of Pearl Harbor? Well, the simple thing about 1936, Roosevelt felt, even though he was legitimizing the Hitler regime, that the athletes should go ahead and perform. As I said, I worked with Marty Glickman in the 1980s. Marty was supposed to perform in the 4x100 relay with Sam Stoller. They were both sidelined. Because, as Marty said, Avery Brundage, who was the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee at that time, did not want to see 2 Jews on the podium winning gold medals. And Marty wanted to stick it right to the Fuhrer's face, he told me. That's what he wanted to do, so he agreed with Roosevelt. Being on TV in 1939, no big deal. He was used to speaking to large crowds and had the fireside chat. As far as baseball in 1942, well, this guy here, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner of baseball, writes a letter to Franklin Roosevelt and says, what are we supposed to do? We're at war. Should we play or shouldn't we play? Mind you, in 1918, baseball cut its season down because the United States entered World War I in 1917. 1918, the American League owners said, you know what, we ought to curtail this and just play the World Series, or forget about playing the World Series because of the war. National League said, no, we're going to play. compromise was reached. The season was curtailed somewhat. The Boston Red Sox, behind Babe Ruth's pitching arm, beat the Chicago Cubs. Had nothing to do with the Spanish influenza. Nothing at all. That came a little later that year in 1918. But anyway, so Landis is trying to figure out, well, what should we do? What should we do as an industry? And the green light letters, or the green light letter, is prominently displayed at Hyde Park. And it's Roosevelt telling the commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Got to remember, baseball is so ingrained in the country with the Casey at the bat and Who's on First and baseball movies and baseball on radio and kids playing baseball all the time. It's really ingrained in the country by this point, 1941. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 or 2.5 hours. Well, Roosevelt's been dead since 1945, so he doesn't watch Yankee Red Sox games, which could go 4.5 hours, and which can be gotten for very little cost. And incidentally, the cost, $80 for the bleacher seats, opening day, Yankee Stadium this year, $80, $1,500 that you could sit near the dugout. Almost on the field. And incidentally, I hope that night games could be extended. Oh, yeah, Roosevelt's class, they could afford the $1,500 tickets. Anyway, and incidentally, I hope that night games could be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. Roosevelt wanted baseball going because he wanted people to take their minds off the war somewhat, and baseball could do that for 2 to 2.5 hours a night, or day, actually, day baseball in those days. The movies, they're going to put me in the movies. And they put Babe Ruth in the movies 10 times between 1920 and, say, 1941. A silent film, Heading Home, stars Babe as, what else? A baseball star. He also starred in Babe Comes Home, a 1927 silent movie, which no print has survived. He also appeared in a Harold Lloyd silent movie in 1928, Speedy, portrayed himself in a cameo role. He portrayed himself, he's signing autographs for kids, and he realizes he has a baseball game to play, and he hails a cab. Harold Lloyd is the cab driver, and it's a cab ride never to forget. Overall, Ruth was in 10 movies, but he wasn't the big baseball star. This guy was the big baseball star who made it over, crossed over to the silver screen, or he tripped the light fantastic on the stage. He was the baseball idol of Manhattan. He played with the New York Giants, and his name was Mike Donlin, and he was a pretty good player. Hit .333. That's pretty good. It took multiple breaks from the game because he wasn't making money to perform on stage and in vaudeville where there was more money. He retired for good in 1914. He went right into the movies. He starred in a movie called Right Off the Bat. Hey, baseball player retires, go into the movies and be in the movie called Right Off the Bat, which featured his New York Giants manager, John McGraw, who also did a little bit of acting. I'm not sure where these films were shot, but some of them probably were shot in Fort Lee. If you go to the Fort Lee Library, if you ever go to the Fort Lee Library, the parking lot area, there are all kind of little signs up there talking about how Fort Lee in the 19-teens was once the film capital of the world. Fort Lee, New Jersey. He made at least 53 appearances on film. Most of those films, like some of the Babe Ruth films, just disintegrated because of the way films were processed in those days and the care you had to give to those films. So, you know, very few of them have survived. This guy is not Gary Cooper. This guy is Lou Gehrig. And this guy is giving a news conference at Grand Central Terminal for a movie called Rawhide that he starred in. And the movie called Rawhide it's a basic movie. It's terrible. Gehrig stars in what would be a Western, hence the 10-gallon hat or the Western hat. And he's at Grand Central Terminal and he's announcing to the world he's retiring. He can't take the pressure of being the New York Yankees first baseman anymore. He's had it with baseball, and he's going to Montana with his sister, even though he's married at the time, but he's going out there with his sister. And he and his sister are going to be on this ranch in Montana, and he's going to forget everything about the world, and he's going to retire and relax in solitude. A couple things about this movie. One is he was born in New York City. Two, he went to primary school in New York City. He went to Columbia University. He played with the New York Yankees, and he lived up here down the street, well, 3 miles down the street, in New Rochelle, which is called the area. The street is called Lou Gehrig Way. You know, it would be a forgotten movie, except for this. Lou Gehrig was stricken with ALS. And he was stricken and diagnosed in 1939. This movie is made about a year and a half prior to his diagnosis. And for medical research, the doctors were able to look at this movie and see how he moved, how he turned his head, moved his arms, moved his legs, and his gait and everything else, his walk. And they were able to judge how quickly the disease had gone through his body. So for medical research, the movie was worthwhile back then. Funny thing about Gehrig and Ruth and medical research, they had the movie for Gehrig, and or Gehrig, to watch him, how he degraded, for lack of a better term, over the years. And Babe Ruth had throat cancer. And Babe Ruth, number 3 in the lineup, Gehrig, number 4 in the lineup. Anyway, Babe Ruth was one of the first ever to get chemotherapy. It helped him a little bit, and then it didn't help him. So Gehrig, the film opens with Gehrig announcing his retirement at Grand Central Terminal. It's a terrible movie. Bugs Bunny was in a cartoon playing a heckler out in the outfield. He's watching the Gas House Gorillas. It was the Gas House gang, the St. Louis Cardinals 1934 team. So this is a takeoff on that. And he's heckling. He's telling the Gas House Gorillas, I could beat you with one arm tied behind my back and all that other stuff. And he's got his carrot juice. He's got his carrot. He's got his bag of popcorn. The Gas House Gorillas are murdering the teetotalers who look like guys from the 1890s, but 40 years later, they got old. And so they challenge him, and Bugs Bunny would beat the Gas House Gorillas. Movies, that is Madonna jumping into the arms of Rosie O'Donnell with Gina Davis back there with the chest protector. Tom Hanks is in this movie called League of Their Own. Based on pretty much a true story about the Women's Professional Baseball League, which was around from 1943 to 1952, the Rockford Peaches. That was the team there. Tom Hanks was playing a guy who resembled Jimmy Fox, who was the great slugger with the Philadelphia A's and the Boston Red Sox back in the 1930s. And the guy that Hanks is portraying is not Jimmy Fox, but it's a knockoff of Jimmy Fox. And Hanks in this movie says, his famous line is, "There's no crying in baseball." Casey Candell, who's a coach with the Seattle Mariners, his mother was in this league, and he was the technical advisor of this movie. As he told me 25 years ago, he said, "My mother taught me how to hit." And there's Gary Cooper, Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story. Bull Durham, Kevin Costner playing an aging catcher who's supposed to be tutoring a young guy who's got $1 million arm and a 10-cent head. There's a love story there with Susan Sarandon, based on a real story somewhat. Ron Shelton, who was the guy who wrote the movie, was a Baltimore Orioles farmhand back in the 1960s, and he based Tim Robbins' character on a guy by the name of Steve Dalkowski, who recently passed away. Dalkowski could throw a baseball over 100 miles an hour, but had no control on the baseball field or control off the field. And so he's based on that. And the Costner character is supposed to get the maturity that Robbins needs, and there's a whole bunch of other things in Bull Durham. That's Jerry Lewis. The Los Angeles Dodger players became the darlings of Hollywood once Walter O'Malley moved his Brooklyn Dodgers to Los Angeles. And here's Jerry Lewis telling Pee Wee Reese what he wants him to do in the movie, The Geisha Boy, which is one of the first movies that featured Dodgers players. Robert Redford was in the movie, The Natural. The book was turned into a movie. Here's Costner again talking to an actor playing Joe Jackson, The Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. They didn't last year. The Yankees and White Sox were supposed to play in an Iowa cornfield. They didn't because of COVID-19. Baseball is going to try it again this year. Shoeless Joe Jackson. And there's the smartest guy in baseball. Just ask him, Billy Beane, here played by Brad Pitt. Moneyball, the movie based on the book Moneyball by Michael Lewis and Analytics. And there is Walter Matthau. Walter Matthau, one of my favorite actors. I don't think he ever did anything bad, from Face in the Crowd to The End with Grumpy Old Men with Jack Lemmon. In fact, they reprised that role after being in The Fortune Cookie together, same type of situation. And of course, The Odd Couple, where Walter Matthau was the baseball writer covering the New York Mets, and Felix, of course, his roommate, was a photographer, and I'll have more on that story in a couple of minutes, using a good radio segue. Sponsored by the Chico Bail Bonds, Bad News Bears. Major League, 2 movies starring Charlie Sheen as the central character. And there's me in Pittsburgh in October of 2018, leaning against the wall at Forbes Field. That's the only thing left of Forbes Field. It's right in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh right now, except they left the wall up there. And if you're looking at this, walk to the left, my right, in the movie, in the picture, you'll see the spot where Bill Mazeroski hit the home run to beat the New York Yankees in Game 7 of the 1960 World Series, with Yogi running back there looking helplessly as the ball sails over the wall and over his head. Anyway, Bing Crosby was one of the owners of the Pittsburgh Pirates. In 1946, Bill Veeck sold a small chunk of the Cleveland Indians to Bob Hope. Hope was a native of Cleveland. He came over there after being born in England, and he was an Indians fan and jumped at the chance to own a small share of his hometown team for quite a while. Crosby invested in the Pittsburgh Pirates the same year Hope was investing in the Indians. So The Road to Baseball, starring Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. But there's more to this. There was a movie that was being bounced around called Angels in the Outfield, and that ended up at Pittsburgh, at Forbes Field, at the home of the Bing Crosby team, the Pirates. And Bing apparently had some sway and suggested, hey, go to Forbes Field and shoot the movie, and they did. These are not all the movies, but these are some of them. Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, Natural, Moneyball. Some of the movies, and like I said, there are a lot more of them with the baseball theme. That is a Pulitzer Prize winning picture from 1948. It is Babe Ruth, and he's leaning on a baseball bat. And I have a story about that. Back in 1979, I was working most of the time for WGRC Radio in Nanuet, New York, Rockland County, 500-watt radio station, and doing some stuff for WNEW News in New York. The William B. Williams, Julius LaRosa station. Julie used to sing national anthems at Shea Stadium before Mets games. But this picture was taken by Nat Fine, and I'm about 23 years old in 1979 when I crossed paths with Nat Fine, who was around Piermont. He ran a picture store, and he was doing some work for Orange and Rockland Utilities, basically shooting dead squirrels, shooting pictures of dead squirrels who ate into power lines and caused blackouts. By 1948, Fine was with the New York Journal-American. And he takes this picture, which wins a Pulitzer Prize. Now, I've had 4 scoops in my life. John Lindsay running for New York Senate. I got 1978, the end of the National Football League strike. San Diego Chargers owner upset with with San Diego and threatening to move his Chargers somewhere else, and also the end of the National Hockey League 1992 strike, player strike. So I know how scoops go, right place at the right time. And I asked Nat Fine about, did he put any conscious effort into this picture? And Nat said no. He said all the photographers, you could see the photographers standing there on the first baseline taking pictures of Ruth this way. So Ruth is cancer. I mean, he's cancer stricken. He's wasting away, and he's in the Yankee clubhouse. And he's putting on the uniform for the last time, and he's struggling, but he's okay, and he struggles to get out. The photographers go out there to take positions on the first base line. Nat said that he decided he was going to follow Babe, and the Yankee dugout was on the third base side at that point. So he's following Babe. Babe struggles to get out on the field. They're playing the national anthem. Nat is not too far behind them at the dugout, takes a few pictures, and there you go. One of the few Pulitzer Prize winning sports pictures taken by Nat Fine back in the late 1940s. Ruth would die shortly thereafter. Homer Simpson, Baseball Hall of Famer, yes, big display in 2017. Homer Simpson and the Simpsons, Springfield Nuclear Power Plant wins the game, which featured also Major League stars there. Smithers with the cup, and Monty Burns was the owner of the power plant and owner of the team. Oh, Wilbur, Sandy Koufax. I'm not sure if he's signing the autograph for Mr. Ed or Wilbur, played by Alan Young, the Mr. Ed show Koufax is on. Fred Gwynn as Herman Munster, Leo DeRocher as the Dodger third base coach. Leo is going to the back. He's hanging out for some reason where Herman and his son Eddie are playing father and son baseball. DeRocher gives him a contract for the Dodgers. Fred can't make it. Herman can't make it because he's 7'6", weighs 540 pounds, and is a danger on the baseball field. But the Munsters have a storyline about Leo DeRocher, the Dodgers, and Herman Munster trying out for the Dodgers. That is Jim Lefevre, who is on the left, and Al Ferrara on the right, both with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Ferrara said he knew he made it to the major leagues when he had one of these baseball cards. Lefevre was the manager of the Seattle Mariners in the late 1990s. And I said to him one day, I said, what were you doing on Gilligan's Island? And he said, we were shrinking Gilligan's head. We were headhunters. And they were supposed to eat Gilligan, but of course, everything that happens in Gilligan's Island at the end of the episode, all 7 castaways are fine. Gilligan screws up, but somehow overcomes the screw up. Johnny Roseboro, the Dodger catcher, was on Dragnet. Just the facts, man. The Dodgers owner, Walter O'Malley, appeared with the Rifleman Star, the TV show of the 1950s, and a former Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman, Chuck Connors, in a 1965 show called Branded. Willie Davis acted in The Love Machine. Willie was the Dodgers center fielder. He was also in Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front movie and The Flying Nun. The Dodger catcher Roseboro appeared in Dragnet 1968, Brooks Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, and Experiment in Terror. And you probably know the guy on the left. His name, Phil Silvers. The guy on the right, Steve Bilko. If I'm with you in person, I ask, who's that guy? And do you know who that guy is? But we can't really do that with Zoom. But anyway, the guy who wrote the show, Nat Hiken, who also wrote Car 54, Where Are You?, was infatuated with Steve Bilko. He saw him play baseball with the minor league Los Angeles Angels. That was the Pacific Coast League. The Pacific Coast League was a pretty good league. Bilko was a big hitter in the Pacific Coast League, but he was great for that league, but not good enough to stick around and have any impact really in Major League Baseball. But he does have the impact on Nat Hiken because he names the title character on the show, the Phil Silver Show, the Bilko Show, where you never get rich, Bilko. Donna Reed, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, the Munsters, the Phil Silver Show, also known as Bilko or You Never Get Rich. And that brings me to Yogi. And Yogi and I are sitting around one day and we're talking and I said, hey, you and a bunch of Yankees ended up on the Bilko Show. He said, yeah. I said, yeah, I remember the story. You guys all ended up in Fort Baxter in the middle of Kansas. How'd the Yankees end up in Kansas? Oh, no, we didn't. We did in the Bronx. And I said, I know you did the Biograph Theater in the Bronx. I know that. Yeah, I know you did that in the Bronx off Southern Boulevard. But what were you doing in Kansas? He said, no. He said, we went over the George Washington Bridge. We went across the Bronx Expressway. We got off. We went to the studio and we were there. At that point, I said, you know what, Yogi, you're right. They did it in the Bronx and it was only a TV show. It was just Yogi and we both laughed about it. Moose Stubing. Some of you might remember this guy, Captain Stubing. Moose Stubing? Captain Stubing. Well, there's a story behind that, and they're related. Aaron Spelling, who used to be the king of schlock on TV, that's what he called himself, and he had Charlie's Angels, and he had The Pain, and Fantasy Island, and Love Boat, and Dynasty, and other shows. Used to use the Baseball Encyclopedia to name his TV characters. And he's going through the Baseball Encyclopedia and he stumbles on Stubing, and that's it. That's the name of my captain. And Moose Stubing, I asked him, did you get paid for it? He said, no, but me and my family know that Captain Merrill Stubing is named after me. John Forsythe, who was on Dynasty, the spelling show, landed his first paying gig as the ballpark announcer at Ebbets Field. He did the PA in the 1950s for the Dodgers. He would star in one of Spelling's hits, Dynasty, in the 1980s, and that earned him the right to be part of the Los Angeles Dodgers celebrity charity game, which they played every year. And here he's standing next to Jack Lemmon, who played Felix Unger in the 1968 movie, The Odd Couple. And you probably know The Odd Couple. Can two divorced men live with each other without driving each other crazy? Felix, of course, a photographer. Oscar, the sports writer. It's 1968, and the movie is shot with Matthau and Lemmon. And the scene is Lemmon calls Shea Stadium's press box. And I can tell you the phone they used because it was there in the movie. And it was still there 40 years later or whatever it was when I was there. Anyway, so the phone that was used, you couldn't really see the baseball field all that well because there was a post in front of it. And you couldn't hear all that well. And you usually turned your back to the field because you wanted to hear. So anyway, Felix calls Oscar. Oscar comes to take the phone. And Felix wants to know what he wants for dinner. Meanwhile, on the baseball field, there is a ground ball hit by Bill Mazeroski that's turned into a triple play. And Oscar hears the roar of the crowd and he's dumbfounded. What happened? Oh, you missed the best player of the year for the Mets, a triple play. And the rest is Odd Couple history, of course. They get into a fight. But there is Jack Lemmon, who is playing baseball for some charity at Dodger Stadium along with John Forsythe. Bob Uecker, who I've known for a long, long time, since the 80s, the former catcher with the Milwaukee Braves, the Atlanta Braves, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Philadelphia Phillies, Mr. Baseball from the Miller Lite commercials. His career is done, and he's working for the Atlanta Braves, but he's working on a stand-up comedy routine, a lot about baseball. And Al Hurt, the trumpet player, comes in to where he's performing, and Uecker is killing. He absolutely kills. And Al Hurt calls Johnny Carson, says, you got to have him on the show. He's great. And of course, if you're a comic, you've got it made if you are sitting in that chair. If Carson tells you to come to the desk, you got it made. And he did call Uecker to the desk. Uecker was on the show a lot, particularly when Milwaukee was out in Los Angeles playing baseball. And Carson didn't know much about him. And he says to Uecker, I hear you were a baseball player during the commercial break. And Uecker says, yeah, I have one of these. So that's a baseball card, so I must be. On Broadway, some of you might have seen Damn Yankees. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. This is around the 1954 Broadway season. Yankees had just come off winning 5 straight championships. Nobody's beating them. And Joe Hardy's with the Washington Senators, a team that was in the World Series in 1933. And anyway, Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil so Washington can win. There was one other song that was famous that came out of there called You Gotta Have Heart. And there's Sullivan. And there's the amazing Mets. Ed Sullivan right here on our stage tonight, our really big shoe, the amazing Mets. My cousin, Jerry Stiller, and his wife, Ann Mirror, were on that show 36 times. And Jerry and I have spoken, or did speak. He passed away about 2 years ago, a year ago. Anyway, and Ed was a sports fan. And Ed had a lot of quirkiness. If you ever saw that, you want to see how the show was going. Anyway, so the Mets are there singing You Gotta Have Heart. And Ed Sullivan is loving that. And speaking of that, there is cousin Jerry along with my kids back in 1994. And cousin Jerry, it's a great segue to this. There is George Steinbrenner. There is Jerry Seinfeld. And George Steinbrenner was a part of the Seinfeld show. In fact, he was so much a part of the Seinfeld show that he actually sent in story ideas to Larry David, who wrote the show. And the storyline suggested by George included Missing George, board meeting, move, different uniforms. I'm going to concentrate on Missing George because Jerry is in there, Jerry Stiller. And this is the story. George Steinbrenner at American Shipbuilding in Tampa, Florida, had an employee that he was worried about, that he thought had some sketchy friends, and that, he was worried about him, that maybe something would happen to him. So it's a Friday, and George goes home, says goodbye to everybody, and says goodbye to the guy. He comes back Monday morning, and the car is still in the parking lot. And George starts, where is he? Where is he? He's not here. Calls up the Tampa police. They issue an all-points bulletin. The guy eventually comes in, and George is very relieved to see this guy come back in. But they turn that into a story. Missing George. George Costanza was the assistant traveling secretary for the New York Yankees, and George sees his car there and then goes out to the house of the Costanzas, and he sees Frank Costanza, played by my cousin Jerry Stiller, and he says, "We think George is dead." And Jerry Stiller is looking like this. You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Jay Buhner had a great career with Seattle, and Ken Phelps was a washout with the Yankees, but that was the joke in that show. If you knew George, your food was his food. He had one board meeting on the show that was moved to a restaurant. That happened in Yankee Stadium in real life, and they tried out different uniforms for the minor league team. Didn't work out, but it became a show on Seinfeld. And George actually did try out to be on Seinfeld. You could see this clip up on YouTube. It did not work out well. It was terrible. Seinfeld was quoted. He actually did a scene in the show, and it was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. It wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Steinbrenner's grandkids loved George being lampooned on Seinfeld. Keith Hernandez was on a Seinfeld show. George Costanza gets jealous because Keith Hernandez and Jerry Seinfeld have become two close friends. Hernandez claimed he didn't know who Seinfeld was when his agent Scott Boras said, "You want to be on the show?" Seinfeld was a big-time Mets fan. Boras said, "Well, they'll fly you out first class. You'll be in a nice hotel for a week. You get paid $15,000. Keith said, "Oh, of course I know who he is." He didn't know who he is, but he played himself on the show, and they became friends. George Steinbrenner, Saturday Night Live. Here he is on Saturday Night Live, one of the hosts on Saturday Night Live. And also Saturday Night Live, baseball still entrenched in the culture. Chico Escuela, played by Garrett Morris. Baseball been very, very good to me. I was going to leave Wally Pipp out until I watched the first show of Jeopardy this year, because it's 96 years since Lou Gehrig took over first base from Wally Pipp, because Wally Pipp had a headache. And the old story when I was a kid growing up, don't get Wally pipped. What does that mean? Hey, don't get Wally pipped, because somebody may take your job if you sit it out. They may do it better, and you might never get that job back again. He was the question on Jeopardy season 37, show number 1 back in September of 2020. Who was Wally Pipp? The Yankees planned on replacing Pipp with Lou Gehrig, who was tearing up minor league baseball at the time. So Wally Pipp. Baseball and cigarettes. Babe Ruth, the old gold cigarettes. There he is in a blindfold test selling old gold. Whole bunch of baseball players sold Chesterfield in 1948, including Joe Dimaggio, who I guarantee you did not pay for the cigarette. And Yoo-hoo, Joe Garagiola, who I knew, Yogi's friend since he was 2 years old, once said to me, when Yogi steps in it, he steps in it. And when he was talking about business, Yoo-hoo, Mickey Mantle allegedly drank it, maybe with some Cutty Sark in there. Moose Skowron, one of my favorite people ever to interview. He was with Washington in 1964, and Ellie Howard, the Yankee catcher. This is what Garagiola was talking about when Yogi steps in, and he steps in it. Yogi meets the family that's put out Yoo-hoo. They can't get it on the shelf. He's at a New Jersey country club in 1955, and the Oliveri family said, hey, how would you like to try it? Just tell us what you think. Yogi tasted the drink, and he became really rich because he was involved on board, and they sold like hotcakes. One time, said Yogi, as told to me by Dave Kaplan, one time I was in the office and the phone rang. No one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who's calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yogi sold Kraft Italian dressing, and he sold batteries, and he sold beer, and he sold bicycles. He was all over the place. I want my Mapo. And he finished up with the Affleck duck commercial back about 8-9 years ago. Joe D. and Marilyn Monroe, the romance of the century, at least as far as baseball is concerned. Guaranteed, Joe didn't pay for the cigarette, the drink, or probably the date with Marilyn. On January 14th, 1954, Joe and Marilyn elope in San Francisco. In October 1954, Marilyn files for divorce, citing only mental cruelty. I have heard a lot of stories, and it always centers around cruelty about that divorce, but it's hearsay, so I'm not going to repeat the stories, but they always center around cruelty. And it had a lot to do with this picture, or this movie, 7-Year Itch. Dimaggio is on the set that day when the skirt blows up. By the way, somebody in Stamford, Connecticut had a sense of humor, I think, because Marilyn's skirt blows up as you exit the Congregational Church, the First Congregational Church. You see her backside. To my left, Marilyn's left, 26-foot Marilyn, who goes around country every year on tour, is another church that sees her side. But it was supposedly cruelty of some sort, and Marilyn gets out of there. Joe is in songs like Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt by Paul Simon. We Didn't Start the Fire, Joltin' Joe. Duke Ellington did a song about Jackie Robinson. Tomorrow is the anniversary of Jackie Robinson, 74 years. He broke the color barrier playing with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And Teresa Brewer did Mickey. Talk a little bit about Mrs. Robinson. Again, I've heard stories about how Joe Dimaggio and Paul Simon met for dinner, and Joe walks in and says, what do you mean, where have I gone? I'm here, I haven't gone anywhere. And Paul Simon says, you were my hero, and you were gone in 1951. I never saw you after that. Well, what do you mean I'm gone? And Paul Simon goes intellectual, explains what he was thinking about, how he was a hero, and Joe accepted that explanation. He was on Dick Cavett, and he being Paul Simon, he says, I said that I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero, and genuine heroes were in short supply. He accepted the explanation, thanked me, we shook hands, and said good night. Dimaggio did not like Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle did not like Dimaggio. Mantle was upset that Dimaggio's name was used in the song. The long story, Dimaggio was jealous of 21-year-old Mantle. You know, look how he looked, or 20-year-old Mantle. And Mantle was upset because he thought he tore up his knee because Dimaggio loafed on the ball during the 1951 World Series. Cavett asked why Mantle wasn't used instead of Dimaggio or his name, and Paul responded, "It's about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are." Terry Cashman and I share the same periodontist. I saw my periodontist Monday morning at 8 o'clock. I said, "How's Terry doing?" He said, "He's doing well." We talked about this song, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, and there's somebody missing in the picture sleeve. The picture sleeve missing is Joe Dimaggio. He's not in this 1981 song performed and written by Terry Cashman, a former minor league baseball player. He was left out of the song and airbrushed from the picture sleeve. Terry once told me, he said, Dimaggio asked, "Well, why wasn't I in there?" And Terry said, "Because it's about the 1950s and players of the 1950s." And Dimaggio agreed, "Yeah, I only played 2 years. I wasn't Joe Dimaggio really in those 2 years." And that was that. Phil Rizzuto has a gold record. Yeah.
I actually have to cut out, but you can
Okay.
keep going as long as you want.
We got about 6 more minutes.
Okay, yeah, but I got to
Okay,
run.
and I will send you this afterwards,
All right, cool.
and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, see you, Evan. Thanks.
Okay, there is Phil Rizzuto, his gold record, and Hall of Fame ring sitting there. Phil, the only baseball Hall of Famer with a gold record. And Rizzuto is asked by Meatloaf in 1978 and Jim Steinman to be Phil Rizzuto and be on our record and just describe a player going around the bases. And that was all he was told. It is about a player who wants to get to second base and then to third base and eventually come home with a girl in the backseat of the car. And he does. Scooter takes about 100 takes to get it right because he thought he wasn't Rizzuto, that he was some sort of actor, and then eventually would become Scooter. Scooter said he never knew the song was about sex until his kids, who were in college in Boston in the late 1970s, said, "It's about sex." Huckleberry, he fooled me, but he didn't give up the gold record. Baseball cards, baseball cards, baseball cards. My baseball cards here. My periodontist thanks you, Cy Berger, for putting bubblegum into the baseball cards and really injuring my teeth. But the baseball cards were good because you can learn from the back how to add, subtract, multiply. You also, if you're so interested, you also learn how to gamble. I don't know how many of you flip cards like that, but you did. You could see on the card here, it says Oakland, so you could look up geography, and they were great bicycle flaps. You put them in with a clothespin on a spoke, you went around, and they made a great whirling noise. The baseball card, part of my youth, not part of anybody's youth today. No new songs, really, no new literature. Bring up Yogi Berra again. Ernest Hemingway wrote Old Man in the Sea. He wrote Old Man in the Sea. And he talks about the great Dimaggio in Old Man in the Sea. That's what, roughly 1938 he wrote it. Anyway, Hemingway's meeting the Yankees in the 1950s. And Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, blah, 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 blah. Ernest Hemingway, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi sticks out his hand. "Hi, Ernie, what paper you write for?" Should have said Kansas City Star. No real great movies. Last probably Moneyball, just another sport. Homer Simpson, Baseball Hall of Famer, 2017. Casey at the Bat is in the Hall of Fame. John Fogerty's center field, A League of Their Own, and Abbott Costello's Who's on First. Joe Namath and Me, 1988, with my friend Bruce Morton. Joe Namath wins the Super Bowl in 1969, cements the Super Bowl as the biggest event in the United States sports realm, bigger than the World Series. In 1950, baseball, horse racing, boxing dominated American sports. By 1965, football surpassed baseball. Muhammad Ali was bigger than boxing. He was bigger than most people in the 70s and into the 80s. He didn't do much to prolong boxing that's in the dumps now, and horse racing is only there because of slot machines at racetracks. That's Jim Bouton, who passed away last year. Jim Bouton, or a couple of years ago, Jim Bouton wrote baseball's quintessential book called Ball 4. The New York Public Library said it was one of the most influential, 20 most influential books of the 20th century that came out in 1970. Humanized Players, and Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner of baseball, called Bouton into his office and said, "Say everything's a lie," and Bouton refused to do so. He said everything is true. So it also was used part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended the reserve clause, which tied a baseball player into the team they signed with in perpetuity or forever, unless a team decided to get rid of the player. That's me on the red carpet in Philadelphia. Soccer, a lot of youth soccer has replaced baseball as the #1 activity of small kids. And we end with, it ain't over until it's over. You know, nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. The future ain't what it used to be. It gets late early out there, left field at Yankee Stadium with the shadows. If you see a fork in the road, take it. And it ain't over until it's over. It ain't over until it's over, but it's going to be over very soon because I'm going to talk about Mike Dyer. Mike Dyer was with the Long Island Press in 1973 covering the New York Mets. And Yogi's team wasn't very good that year. Well, Seaver was injured, and Grody was injured, and a whole bunch of others were injured. But Yogi's team is treading water, but nobody's running away with the National League East pennant. And but Yogi's team is in a precarious situation. They're within striking distance. But if they lose a game here or there, it could be over. So Mike Dyer asks the question at Shea Stadium. Everybody is surrounding Yogi from the New York media. And Mike says, "Is it over, Yogi?" "It ain't over till it's over," was the answer. It ain't over till it's over, but it's over now. It's the last time I saw Yogi Berra, June 26, 2011, at the museum. He was 86 years old at the time. I miss Yogi. Yogi was a cool character to be around, had great stories, and he's there with me and Brian Cashman, the New York Yankees general manager. Well, I want to thank Barbara. I don't know, anybody have any questions? If you don't have any questions, I'm gonna say goodbye, and I hope you enjoy the program. Hope to speak to you sooner than later. Stay well and enjoy the rest of the day. My name is Evan Weiner. Again, thank you, Barbara, for inviting me, and we will see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.